Between 1910 and 1970, too many Indigenous children were forcibly removed from their families. This is a result of various harsh government policies. These generations of children removed under those policies became known as the stolen generations.
Papers, Maud!
Wait, what? He was in the front yard and somebody just pulled up and took him?
Yeah, policemen or rangers would come, pull up, just grab these half-coloured kids or coloured kids and then chuck them in the truck and then take them.
One of the darkest chapters of Australian history was the forced removal of Aboriginal children from their families. The term stolen generation refers to all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians who were removed by force as children from the people who they loved the most as a result of past race-based policies set up by both state and federal governments. They are collectively known as the stolen generations because 7 whole generations were affected by it. Children as young as babies were removed by governments, churches and welfare bodies to be brought up in institutions, fostered out or adopted by non-Indigenous families. In fact, it's estimated that between 1 in 10 or 1 in 3 Aboriginal Indigenous children were taken from their families between 1910 and 1970. Then, at the raw age of 18, they were released into white society, most of them scared for life by their experiences, with many Aboriginal people still searching for their parents and siblings. The removal of Aboriginal children took place from the early days of the British colonisation in Australia. It broke important cultural and spiritual family ties and has left a long-lasting intergenerational impact on their lives and well-being. Government policies concerning Aboriginal people were implemented under different laws in the various states and areas of Australia. These laws meant that nearly every aspect of their lives were closely monitored and controlled by the government. For example, their relationships, their children, work, wages, housing and land, and their access to healthcare and education. By removing Aboriginal children, they hoped that they would break their circle of life and their Aboriginal culture within a short amount of time, hoping that their genes would get bred out when Aboriginal people had children with white people. But adult Aboriginals resisted efforts to be driven out of towns by simply coming back. But children being taken away were much easier to control. Records about stolen generations and their families were kept by governments, as well as churches, missions, and other non-government agencies. Many records have been lost as a result of poor record keeping, fires, floods, and in some cases, due to deliberate destruction, which is the saddest one. Changes to the structure of government departments and within non-government organisations have made it very difficult to trace records to assist with finding family connections. This is Faye Clayton, a 73-year-old Aboriginal woman from the Wurundjeri tribe, an active member of the Stolen Generations, and this is her story.
I was born Faye Clayton, and I was born at Clayton, and I was one of 9 siblings, and 6 of us were taken. I couldn't understand why. My mum and dad were at work, and my father he was a rat off Tobruk for 5 years. He fought for this country and I took his kids. That was really sad. And my parents came up to the homes a couple of times, but they wouldn't let them in to see us. So that was sad too. So I stayed there in Cootamundra and went out and worked on 4 farms. Ran away from everyone. I was a naughty girl. No, they treated some of us girls really badly. So I took off many years ago when I was 17 and 18. And whilst I was there, my brother found out where I was. And he told me where Mum was and, do you want to go and see Mum? No, I don't. because we were told they didn't want us in the homes, see, so you think, oh God, why would you go back and see parents who didn't want you? But these are all the liars and whatever they did, the controlling things that they did to us in order to make us stay away from our people.
Faye Clayton was stripped from her individual, social and cultural identity. She was tricked by the Australian federal and state government that her mother no longer wanted her as a daughter. She was lied to, controlled by, and misled to believe that her own community did not accept her. She was led to confusion when she would see another Koori person walking on the other side of the road, as she was told to not cross the road or to even look at them. These were her own people, and yet she couldn't even interact with the people who were once her family. This is her social identity being taken away from Faye, as she was told to ignore her own beliefs, language and place. Faye admitted it took her a few years to then mix with her Koori people again, as for a long time this was not permitted.
In 1995, the Australian government launched an inquiry into the policy of forced child removal. The report was delivered to Parliament on the 26th of May in 1997. It estimated that between 10% and 33% of all Indigenous children were separated from their families between 1910 and 1970. The report, Bringing Them Home, acknowledged the social values and standards of this time, but concluded that the policies of child removal breached the fundamental human rights. The Keating government commissioned the inquiry into the stolen generations, but the Howard government received the report. Howard's government was sceptical of the report's findings and largely ignored its recommendations. When Kevin Rudd came into power in 2007, he promised to deliver a national apology to the stolen generations. This promise was fulfilled on the 13th of February 2008. The word sorry in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages and cultures holds special meaning, often used to describe the rituals surrounding death. Sorry in this context expresses empathy, sympathy, and an acknowledgement of loss rather than responsibility. The apology was not an expression of personal responsibility or guilt by individual Australians. It was provided by the Australian government in recognition of policies of past governments. No individual Australian was asked to take personal responsibility for actions of past governments. Saying sorry was about acknowledging the pain and suffering of the individuals, their families, and their communities. To achieve reconciliation, the Australian community and our major institutions must understand and acknowledge the wrongs of the past and understand their effects. The trauma experienced by Indigenous people as a result of past laws, policies and practices continues to be passed down from generation to generation with devastating consequences. Addressing intergenerational trauma involves building a better understanding among the broader Australian community of the continuing impact of past actions on the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to this day. This process is essential to achieving truth, justice and healing for everyone, therefore making Kevin Rudd's apology so important. The 10th anniversary of the National Apology in 2018 is a milestone that all Australians can be proud of, and it's important to bring all Australians together and acknowledge that historic moment. It's an occasion that invites us to take recognition of our progress toward reconciliation, to be proud of the progress that we've made, while recognising that we still have a long way to go.
Today we honour the Indigenous peoples of this land, the oldest continuing cultures in human history. We reflect on their past mistreatment. We reflect in particular on the mistreatment of those who were stolen generations, this blemished chapter in our national history. The time has now come for the nation to turn a new page in Australia's history by righting the wrongs of the past and so moving forward with confidence to the future. We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these our fellow Australians. We apologise, especially for the removal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families.
Please take this time now to reflect and think about the stolen generations and all that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders went through. All of the hardships and all of the hardships they are still dealing with today. Please try and imagine how you would feel if all this happened to you and your family. Now think about the apology. How was it conveyed? Was Kevin Rudd too late in delivering it? And was it enough?
This story's right, this story's true. I would not tell lies to you, like the promise said they did not keep, and how they fenced us in like sheep. Said to us, come take care of him. Set us up on mission lane. Told us to read, to write and pray. Then they took the children away, took the children away. The children away. Snatched from their mother's breast, said this is for the best, took them away. Welfare and the police came, said you got to understand. We'll give to them what you can't give. Teach them how to really live. Teach them how to live their self. Humiliated them instead. Taught them that and taught them this. And others taught them prejudice. They took the children away. The children away. Breaking their mother's heart, carrying us all apart, took them away. One day on Framingham came and didn't give a damn. My mother cried, go get their dad. He came running, fighting mad. Mother's tears were falling down. Dad shaped up and stood his ground. He said, you touch my kids and you fight me. Then they took the stronger family, took us away. They took us away. Snatched from our mother's breast, said this is for the best, took us away. Told us what to do and say. Taught us all the white man's way. Then they split us up again and gave us gifts to ease the pain. Sent us off to foster homes. As we grew up, we felt alone, 'cause we were acting white, yet feeling black. One sweet day, all the children came back. The children came back. The children came back. Back where their hearts grow strong. Back when they all belonged, the children came back. Said the children came back. The children came back. Back where they understand. Back to their mother's land, the children came back. Back to their mother. Back to their father. Back to their sister. Back to their brother. Back to their people. Back to their land. All the children came back. The children came back. The children came back. Yes, I